So as Julia said, my name is John Bowen, and I work with Western Kentucky University as a graduate student in our brand new Disaster Science Operations Center. And I'm here to talk to you guys today about the December 11th severe weather event, kind of how the event unfolded, how the event was set up from a meteorology perspective, WKU's incident action plan, how they responded, kind of the lessons that we learned from this event, and then the sustainability of our community, not only from a WKU perspective, but also from the city of Bowling Green. So hopefully you guys enjoy this talk, and if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. I'm pretty used to presenting for research conferences, and that's like a quick 10-minute talk, and this is going to be a little more long form than that. So I will try not to talk really fast like I do at conferences. So with that being said, let's get started. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I will do my best to address them now or during the Q&A. So taking a look at this event from retroactively. So the event has happened. There are some questions that we need to ask ourselves for this kind of event and for the kind of information I want to share with you. So we need to understand what happened on the night of December 11th and the morning, the night of December 10th and the morning of December 11th, because this was a late night event. The Storm Prediction Center had timing of this event from anywhere starting at 4 p.m. all the way up till 2 to 3 a.m. the next day. And we did see some of that happen with the Mayfield tornado. That supercell tornado developed very quickly and early on in the afternoon. It started around 4 o'clock near Arkansas, within Arkansas near Little Rock. Our particular system is separate from the Mayfield tornado, and that one didn't initiate until later in the evening, around a 10 o'clock in central and western Tennessee. So we'll kind of talk about the meteorological setup of this event and why it was so unusual, because this is not a normal event by any stretch of the imagination. If you were to show me information from this event without any context, I would have told you that this event took place in late April or early May. So the fact that this happened in December is very unusual. And then we'll talk about how the event actually played out and what were the results of that event, kind of what damage occurred and exactly how many tornadoes did we see and the result of those. The next question we need to ask is what is the response of WKU and White Squirrel Weather? Our organization, we forecast for WKU in an official capacity for almost any special event, or even from the day to day. We provide forecasting and weather information for our football games, for basketball, any kind of athletic event, for our graduation ceremonies, or any other special event the university is holding, and in special situations like winter weather or severe weather that could impact our campus and community. So we'll take a look at what went right, what were the challenges that WKU faced, and what were the lessons learned from this incident. And finally, we'll kind of tie everything into how does the sustainability play a role in the aftermath of this event. So we'll kind of touch on climate change, because I know that's an important question on everybody's mind. So does climate change play a role in this event? And the complicated answer is yes and no, and we'll get into that. And then we need to talk about what are the social and economical impacts of this event. And then finally, we'll get into, I have lots of pictures from this event, and we'll kind of talk about, are there things that we can do to prevent these kinds of impacts? And there are some pictures of damages, I will forewarn you now, but there's nothing graphic, but there are, you will see images of the damage caused by this event. So what exactly happened? So the nation as a whole, from the Storm Prediction Center to our forecasting team at White Squirrel, identified a severe weather threat about 5 days prior. we were kind of watching the system as it set up and got ready to make landfall on the West Coast. And then as that happened, models were able to ingest that data and get an idea of how the system was starting to look. And what it started to look like was a late spring, early summer severe weather event, which is, again, very unusual for the month of December. So we knew there was the possibility of severe weather. The SPC, which is known as the Storm Prediction Center, had issued convective outlooks lining up with our own forecasts. And we made sure to notify our communities 3-4 days prior. Now, at this time, this particular tweet that you see on screen is from December 9th. There was no way of knowing just how historic this event was going to be for the state of Kentucky. We had an idea of what the severe weather we would see, but I think to some degree, and I wouldn't say this is necessarily true of everybody, but some individuals have become a little complacent in the fact that, oh, this is a severe setup we had seen before. Oh, it hasn't yet directly impacted our community. We'll kind of play it by ear and see how it goes. And to that, I would respond with, well, it's important to take every severe event seriously, even if the event misses by you, because this could be the one event that does hit you and impact you. And that turned out to be the case for this particular event. So I'm going to try not to get too technical on the meteorological side of things, which is hard for me to do because I love talking about weather. But I am going to go over some basic ingredients that were in place that day, and kind of give you a simple applied version of the setup prior to what happened. So we have a basic recipe for severe weather, and you can think of this recipe as the same way for a recipe that you would use to bake a cake. These 4 ingredients must be present, or else it's not going to be severe weather, the same way that certain ingredients have to be present in a cake for it to be a cake. So for severe weather, we talk about lift, which is just simply upward vertical motion in the atmosphere. Instability, how warm is the air, how much energy is available. Moisture, is there available moisture within all layers of the atmosphere, and shear. And shear is particularly special because without shear, you don't get severe weather and you don't get tornadoes. And wind shear is basic in its basic form, the change of wind speed and the change of wind direction as you move up in the atmosphere. And that's a very basic understanding of it, but it's enough for everyone to have an idea of just how big this event was. And each of these ingredients was well in abundance for this event, which is very unusual for December. The graphic on screen shows the most December tornadoes on record, and 2021 completely blows that record out of the water. Most years, the United States sees 20 or fewer tornadoes in December. 2021 saw just an absolute absurd number of tornadoes for this time of year, which again is not normal. This is when us as scientists start raising our eyebrows of maybe something a little odd is going on here. So in terms of lift, this is a lot to take in, I know, but I just would like to show that from this perspective, we are looking at certain ingredients in the atmosphere. And this tells us, let me pull up because I can annotate on the fly. These kinds of features here, where you see these purple lines here, this indicates lift at 300 millibars in the atmosphere. You don't necessarily have to know what that means, but it's high up in the atmosphere. And when we see these, we understand that, okay, so lift is occurring and allowing for the formation of these kinds of storms. And that same lift is present as we come down in the atmosphere, which is indicative of just having the right atmosphere to form these kinds of storms. And like I said, if you have any questions on the technical side of things, I'm more than happy to try to explain it in a different way. But I'm just going to give the basics on this for now. So going into the next variable that we need to look at is called instability. And when we talk about it, we talk about it in energy, joules per kilogram. It's a variable we call CAPE. And typically for a severe weather event, anything from 1,000 joules of CAPE is pretty sufficient for a May to June, summertime severe weather setup. In December, you don't need as much energy to get severe weather going. However, we still had that same kind of late spring, early summer energy. You can see from this map that we had over 2,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE in certain areas, which is a large amount of energy available in the atmosphere for this kind of event. So these were kind of the flagship signs of, okay, maybe this event might be a little bit more than what we anticipated. And then for moisture is the same thing. We have very deep moisture throughout the atmosphere. The deeper the greens are, the more moisture is available. And this is what allows, the clouds to form and condense, to give us that classic thunderstorm structure we normally see. And lastly, for shear, this is the most important ingredient for severe weather in terms of being able to develop tornadoes. This ingredient is what is required for tornadoes to form. And typically, during a normal severe setup, we look for values greater than 40 is usually sufficient. And you can see near the areas of storm initiation in Arkansas and southern Tennessee, we have values of 70 knots of shear, which is huge for especially for a December event. You almost never see these kinds of values for the December event. So it's definitely interesting watching all of these ingredients come together prior to this event. So the resulting forecast from the Storm Prediction Center. The images on the left are 2 days out. So this would have been December 9th. When you see this color code, the orange is an enhanced. It is a 3 out of 5 on their severity scale, as it were, for how likely is this event going? What is the probability of impacts, essentially? And the image below that shows the tornado probability. So you can see the outlined yellow area of 10% tornado probability, which is, again, very high for December. Typically in spring and late April, May, June, these are kind of the normal values you see with the large scale severe setup, but this is unusual for December. And then you could see their day one, they upgraded that to a 4 out of 5. That red zone you see outlined there in Western Kentucky, Tennessee, northeastern Arkansas, and Western Missouri. And we woke up this morning and seeing the SPC upgrade that kind of gave alarm bells in everybody's head. Was like, okay, we have to take this event seriously. This has the potential to be a very destructive event if it unfolds the way that the Storm Prediction Center feels. So the next thing I would love to show you is just some radar images of the event. Some of these are going to be the typical, green, yellow, and red images that you're used to seeing on the news. But there are some that you might not have seen before. And these radar products are good indicators of the tornadoes that were happening at the time. And I've annotated some of them for you, so that way we can have a discussion about it, because I want you to see, this is when we see these kinds of images on radar, these are very alarming for meteorologists in these kinds of situations. So the first thing is your basic radar reflectivity. And what you see here are the tornado, the outlined purple boxes indicate confirmed tornadoes on the ground, either by spotters or certain radar indicators. And you can see that there's kind of two storm cells here, one to the north and one to the south. Each one of these at this moment is producing a tornado. So the next image I want to show you on the left is a product that allows us to see where there is this shows us where things that are not typical precipitation might be in the atmosphere. So ununiformity in precip. So if it was all rain, it would all be the same color. If there's hail or debris, we see different colors show up in that product. And then on the other side is our velocity product. This gives us an idea of where tornadoes might be based on rotation. So at 1:08 a.m. On December 11th, we saw two separate rotations enter into Warren County, one to the north and one to the south. The northern one was beginning to dissipate, and it had already caused significant damage north of Russellville and Logan County. And we saw this and we were like, okay, we might be okay. We might be in the clear because this might be moving off to the north. Pass forward a little more. This is one radar scan forward. This is at 1:10 in the morning. The now main circulation has become more intense. And this is when I'm on my radio with my safety director for WKU. And I'm like, hey, this thing's coming up Russellville Road. Campus might be taking a direct hit from this impact. And all of our forecasters are in our group chat discussing it. And Dr. Durkee, who is the university meteorologist, is in direct communication with the decision makers on ensuring the safety of students at this point. Going ahead another 4 minutes, what you see on the left is called a debris ball. When we see that signature on this particular product on radar, this is, I wouldn't say confirms there's a tornado, because radar is all remote sensing. So without seeing it with our eyes, we cannot say, yes, this is a tornado. However, it is typically a really good indicator and provides solid evidence to say that there is a tornado on the ground causing damage, because that debris is being lifted into the air and is now being picked up by the radar beam. And this is kind of when the forecasters and the decision makers went into, okay, we're about to get impacted by this. We're going to have to quickly transition into disaster response, because at this point, we've got the tornado sirens have been going on for the last 20 minutes. We've ensured that everybody who is out on campus is in a shelter, and everybody is hunkered in down at this point. So going forward a little further in time at 1:17, that debris ball stays present to indicate the tornado has stayed on the ground, and a second smaller circulation shows up. So at this point in time, radar has shown that not one, not two, but three separate tornadoes have entered in and are passing through Warren County, with two of them hitting Bowling Green proper. One of them missing campus by mere hundreds of feet. And that's not exaggerating. It's very fascinating to see. And I'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about the campus response. At 1:20, the tornado directly has come up Russellville Road, is at the roundabout next to the university, and has begun moving up the 31W bypass that runs directly parallel to the university. And from the radar images, we see significant damage has started to occur with the debris ball. And it was at this point that most of the city lost power. So at this point, I had lost power and internet at home. Campus had lost power, and we had lost a lot of our communications because campus didn't have power. My analog radio didn't work because the repeater was down, and a lot of our cell service saw impacts. We couldn't get text messages out. We couldn't get data to our phones. It was a very scary situation. A lot of us up to this point were watching. We have a webcam on top of Van Meter, which is the highest point on campus, and it was pointed directly at the tornado. You could see the tornado approaching campus on this camera. And it was at this point that we were like, oh no, campus took a direct hit. Without any other information and having lost our data, we all thought campus had taken a direct hit. Thankfully, it did not. And then at 1:30, the tornadic circulation leaves Warren County, and we immediately begin to go into our disaster response mode. So the results of this particular event, there were 3 total tornadoes that had entered and affected Warren County. 2 of these tornadoes were rated as EF3 with winds exceeding 136 miles an hour. And in fact, it was estimated that the wind speed of the tornado that directly went through the city, as it destroyed one of the warehouses in our industrial district just to the northeast of town, had estimated wind speeds of 165 miles an hour. And then the smaller tornado, it formed at the airport, at the Bowling Green Airport, and kind of moved parallel in conjunction with the first tornado. And this winds exceeded 110 miles an hour. And both of these tornadoes caused significant damages to businesses, residential areas. There's lots of trees and debris, causing significant power outages as well. We as an organization participated with the National Weather Service up in Louisville. They are our National Weather Service office. We did damage surveys for 6 days in order to determine the strength and intensity of these tornadoes after the fact. And it took us 6 days to travel across the entirety of Warren County just because of how extensive the damage was. Starting from when the tornado entered the county, it immediately went through and completely leveled a residential house. And then it traveled up from there, the Creekwood area, where a lot of the casualties occurred. And then it came up Russellville Road, hit the W31W bypass, and then continued up through subsequent subdivisions in Bowling Green. And it came up, it hit the core, it came close to the Corvette plant. It didn't do damage directly to the Corvette plant. It damaged the Corvette test track. The secondary tornado did, the smaller one. But then the main tornado went and up to our industrial trans park, destroyed a couple warehouses up there. So this was a very large, destructive tornado at times. So just some quick additional weather information from the Storm Prediction Center to show you just how historic this event was. This had the most mesoscale discussions. And when I say a mesoscale discussion, that's when the Storm Prediction Center issues a very localized spot on a map and says, okay, there is very significant weather happening here. Here's how it might evolve. This day had more mesoscale discussions than any other day in the than in the history of the Storm Prediction Center since they started doing mesoscale discussions. And that trumps all, EF5 tornado events, all, high plains events, for any number of mesoscale discussions issued in a single day. That is massive, especially for a December event. The number of storm reports that happened in December doubled the previous record of 645 storm reports in this month of December in 2002. And that is, again, an absurd amount of storm reports for even in a typical severe weather month. The number of storm reports reaches about 1,000 to 1,100, depending on the intensity of event. Occasionally, a month we'll see 1,300 to 1,400 storm reports. So to have 1,200 storm reports in the month of December is huge. And this was the most December tornadoes on record ever. There were 193 tornadoes that occurred in the month of December in 2021, which is more than has ever occurred in the month of December previously in recorded history. So now we're going to get into what the response was. So we had these tornadoes hit between 1:10 in the morning and 1:30 a.m. Western Kentucky University has their own command post that was put in place within the hour of these tornadoes occurring. We had backup generators at the command post, and they had some communication, but were lacking internet, and a lot of the cell service was down within the area. So they were working with skeleton crew and minimal information. But there was a command post set up at our environmental health and safety house, which in and of itself is a little shocking, considering that while the environmental health and safety house was still standing 100 feet away, just behind that parking lot, there was almost total destruction of residential and commercial buildings. So the fact that building stayed standing shows just how close that this tornado came to impacting WKU's main campus. Our emergency management team began assessing damage and ensuring the safety of students almost immediately. And from there, we provided additional assistance to our city EOC. We sent available resources to them to help out with police and fire dispatch, because they were being overwhelmed with calls for search and rescue. So what went well with this event? What do we, having experienced the event, looking back on it, what went right? Well, our team was able to successfully track storms. Our team of meteorologists, that is comprised of both students and staff, we tracked these storms leading up to and throughout the event, and provided the necessary information for our decision makers to act on. There was very quick response with our operations center. WKU PD responded to ensure student safety, and we were able to deploy additional support to our city emergency operations center and city dispatch, almost within the hour of their EOC becoming operational. We were able to successfully use our text message alert system. We use Rave in order to send out notifications to students, faculty, and staff. Anybody within WKU system, whether on or off campus, received a text message notification for this tornado, for the tornado warnings and the imminent tornado impacts. And then we had a generator at our ops center, allowed us to remain operational during a large scale city power outage. Most of the city of Bowling Green, I think 60 to 70% was without power after the tornado event. So we did have that backup power in place for us to be able to use. Additionally, we were able to use our facilities for donation collections and distributions. We had volunteer coordination happen at our research and development facilities. And we were able to house disaster relief teams in our open dorm rooms that were not being occupied at the time. Team Rubicon, they came down several days after the event for cleanup. And it's a testament to how willing WKU is to work with their community, not just for themselves, but for the surrounding community of Bowling Green and Warren County, that they were willing to house this this disaster relief team for cleanup and immediately begin organizing volunteers and donations. Our bus fleet was used for the transport of resources for the city EOC, as well as for the victims and their families in order to relocate them. We had an African-American museum on campus that not only was impacted by the tornado, but then caught fire after the city of Bowling Green turned the power back on in that facility. But we were able to successfully salvage historical artifacts from that museum after the fact. And when you talk about emergency management and the sustainability, you not only have to think of the people, but also the history of things. So it was good that we were able to salvage those artifacts. We directly supported our National Weather Service in official damage surveys, and we performed the appropriate sustainability actions to ensure that displaced students, faculty, and staff and affiliates with WKU had sufficient food and shelter. And the photo here, you can see our team working. The individual in yellow there, he is the meteorologist in charge at the National Weather Service in Louisville. His name is John Gordon. He was in Bowling Green for 6 days doing damage surveys with us. And I'll talk a little bit about more of those damage surveys because it does play into sustainability. So some of the challenges that we faced with this event, communication failure was probably the number one. Without the ability for cell phone signal to get out, without internet, we did not have data. We didn't have information from the outside world. All we had was what we could see with our eyes. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, that's not a lot. You can't really see much at night. So we were not able to assess the full extent of the damages until sunlight. And pretty much up until 6 a.m., we thought campus had taken a direct hit. So we were very fortunate in the fact that it had not, and our response most likely would have been a lot different if campus had taken a direct hit. Now, luckily, a lot of the students had gone home for finals that Friday morning or afternoon, so there weren't too many students remaining on campus. But we did get very fortunate in the fact that the tornado missed us by such a small margin. Now, we did have successful backup generators, which was at our ops center. However, not every building, but most buildings on campus are equipped with a backup generator to ensure that they have power. And a number of those backup generators failed, which to us indicates that we need to ensure proper upkeep of those generators to ensure that they are able to operate in times of crisis like these. Because if we did have students on campus without appropriate power supplied to campus, we might have trouble ensuring their safety. So that was one of the challenges, as well as vulnerability from outside threats that were not of the storm, but were made possible by the storm. So as I mentioned, there were a lot of commercial businesses right behind that our EH&S building. And almost immediately after the storm, 4 or 5 a.m., there began to be looting at the stores. And if campus had taken a direct hit, those kinds of hazards and factors are something we have to think of for the future events, if a future event were to occur, because we don't want people coming in and taking students' personal belongings and things like that out of the dorm room, because when they leave for Christmas break, they leave a lot of their personal effects in those dorm rooms. So those are other vulnerabilities that came up out of this event that we are now aware of and can think on for the possibility of future events. And even though campus didn't take a direct hit from the tornado, there was still $3 million in damages from the outer bands of the winds to the heavy rain and flying debris. So that was an eye opener for me because of the amount of damages that occurred even without the direct impact. So a lot of the lessons learned were a redundancy of communication is a must. We need to have network infrastructure that is key to all operations during this kind of event, which means getting our emergency management team onto FirstNet maybe, or making sure there's a redundancy in network communications so that if one line goes down, we have backups. WKU, we didn't realize this before the event, but after the event, we realized that we had these facilities to use. They aren't being used during Christmas break, so let's use them to support our community. So we were able to open up our facilities that were not typically in use for donation acceptance and distribution, volunteer support, things like that. And we learned that us as a university play a critical role in disaster response. While working in conjunction, we have great partnerships with other agencies, Warren County Emergency Management, Fire, Medical, and Police. We maintain those relationships so that way we can help better support them during these kinds of incidents. We definitely had an impactful presence at the city EOC with a couple of our meteorology students there providing additional support for their very much overwhelmed dispatch team. So let's talk about the big elephant in the room. How does climate change play into this event? Well, one of the first things that we have to talk about is the difference between climate and weather. And a good analogy that I was taught for this was, if you think about it, climate is a person's personality, while weather is a person's mood. So climate is a long history of what is to be expected of an environment, while weather is the day-to-day everyday forecast, today's forecast, tomorrow's forecast, that kind of thing. And while they go in conjunction with the other, one necessarily doesn't shape the other. So, for example, you might normally, your personality might be happy and go-getter and energetic, but you might have a day where you're just in a particularly bad mood. And that doesn't mean that your personality involves that bad mood. But you did have an outlier of a day that was a bad mood. Now, have enough days like that, and a pattern begins to form. And that pattern is what then begins to change your personality. Climate and weather are the exact same. When you have multiple unusual days, then that's when a scientist needs to start looking at, okay, maybe we have a pattern change happening. And maybe that that pattern change can what lead to an overall change in the climate. So when people ask, well, does this one event signal climate change? No, for climate change, we have to take a look at a broader scale of events. Now, that being said, this kind of event has been predicted by scientists who study climate change. They mention the possibility of more nighttime events. They've mentioned the possibility of more events happening outside of the normal scope of severe weather. So those are the kinds of things to keep in mind when we talk about climate change. So was this event an unusual occurrence? Yes, absolutely. This kind of thing is historical and unheard of. And it could signal a possible pattern change. We have to go back and take a look at this event and future events after they occur in order to say that yes, this has indicated a change in climate. So that's the important things to think about there. So what were the societal and economic impacts of this event? Obviously, there were extensive amounts of damage across Warren County, $3 million in damages at WKU alone. I think across the state of Kentucky, there was an estimated $3.5 billion in damages. There were several displaced students who were still on campus or living within the city of Bowling Green, faculty, staff, and families within the community. And WKU worked with those individuals in order to facilitate getting them into temporary housing. There were 19 fatalities in the city of Bowling Green, and I believe there were 70 fatalities within, 70 fatalities within the state of Kentucky. And that includes the Mayfield tornado, as well as the Bowling Green tornadoes. There were numerous businesses destroyed and many operations that were disrupted because of this tornado event. We were planning on holding graduation on Saturday, and that didn't happen. We immediately had to go into our disaster response. The pictures here that you see on the left, the first one is an image of our industrial park in Bowling Green. This is Bowling Green's Trans Park, and that warehouse is totally gone. This one image is where we were trying to debate, where the National Weather Service was debating, do we call this an EF4 or an EF3 tornado? Because this is a major structural destruction, essentially. And then the bottom picture is damage from the Corvette test track from that EF2 tornado, the secondary tornado. So what were some of the sustainability actions taken by WKU? Well, our food pantry went into immediate action in supporting the community to ensure students, faculty, and staff, and those affiliated with WKU had access to food. We were accepting food donations. We had open days that we were organizing in order to get that food out to our community, food, water. We were, for those who we couldn't get food to, we were providing gift cards for groceries, various restaurants. So that way they still had access to the necessary food that they needed. WKU Housing provided temporary living for students, faculty, staff, and their families who were displaced. We have several houses on campus that we were able to have them at for a couple weeks while they figured out other housing situations. This brought about discussion for WKU Hazard Mitigation Plan, which I'm currently in the process of writing. to ensure the safety of campus community of this kind of event in the future. So are our tornado shelters set up appropriately? Do we have places for students to go if they're outside of their dorm rooms, or if they're caught outside? Do we have the resources to get them inside and safe? Those kinds of things. And then there was discussions that was created for creating discussions on redundancy for communications. So obviously, we need to be able to make sure that our radios are working during this kind of situation. If power goes out to the rest of campus, we need our repeater to be working so that way we can communicate with everybody. We wanted to get, what's the word I'm looking for? We wanted to get our emergency staff on what we call FirstNet, AT&T FirstNet, to ensure that they are able to maintain communications even in disaster situations. So those were some of the steps that were taken by WKU. To answer your question, Wallace, as far as electricity being restored after the tornado, it was done in stages. Bowling Green Public Works was working with the fire department in order to ensure that nothing was turned on in a way that would cause additional damages. So, because if you turn power to a particular block of residents on too fast that were damaged, you start getting house fires all over the place. And that's not what we wanted. They were actually able to bring power up relatively quickly. The lesser impacted areas had power restored within 24 hours. So my apartment had power restored within 24 hours because it was outside of the main scope of damage. Places like campus that were a little more impacted had power restored within 3 to 4 days. And the streets that were most impacted, like Russellville Road, the 31W bypass, those took a little more time. Their power was restored within 1 to 2 weeks. And that was actually very fast. But Bowling Green Public Works was estimating that power wouldn't get restored for over a month due to the lack of resources that they had for constructing additional poles. But they were able to get additional resources from other entities throughout the country and be able to get that power up and running a lot faster than what was originally anticipated. So from a sustainability perspective, is it possible to lessen impacts? Yes, to a degree. And the key here is sustainable construction. Now, there is only so much that you can do, and I'll show examples of that. But a lot of these hard-hit areas showed signs of very poor construction. When we were out doing damage surveys with the National Weather Service, we brought along WKU civil engineers to take a look at these houses that were most directly impacted. And when we did that, we discovered that the construction was, while up to code, was not sufficient for the kinds of even the most weak tornadoes that it could possibly impact. I want to draw particular attention to this picture on the right here, where you see our civil engineer. He's pointing out this bolt here is improperly placed. It's supposed to be placed in the center of that block, as well as he was able to easily remove that bolt out of the block, which is not something that you want to see. And typically these are placed every 16 inches. And for these particular houses that were most greatly impacted, they were placed every 32 inches. So these are the kinds of things that we look for when doing damage surveys. And these are the kinds of things that indicate to us that maybe we need to take a look at better building code, building construction, in order to lessen the impacts of severe weather in the future. A few more examples of poor building sustainability are weaknesses in roofs. So a tornado will find any weakness in a roof, no matter how small it is. The winds will get inside and begin lifting the roof off. And that's what you see in the leftmost picture there. There was most likely a structural weakness between the roof and where it was attached to the house, which allowed the tornado winds to get inside. And on the rightmost picture, you see this garage. And this is very typical for garages that are impacted by tornadoes. Typically, having a garage on a house is the greatest weak point of a house in terms of high winds. When a tornado comes through, you'll see one door pushed in and the other door is pushed out. And that signifies rotating winds getting into the garage, most likely underneath the door, and then pushing up to try to lift the house off its foundation. So these are some other examples of what might be poor building for these kinds of events. There are ways to improve, but there is only so much that can be done. And no matter how well a house is built, there's not a whole lot that you can do in regards to a falling tree, especially one that is this healthy. If you take a look at the root structure, you can see that these roots are cleanly snapped. There's no rotting of the wood. And this tree was toppled by sheer wind force alone. So that kind of shows that you can, the best thing to do is prepare as well as you can, but there's only so much really that can be done. But in some situations, the difference is reinforce your house with a few extra, with some extra bolts that might only cost you about $200 in construction. That can make the difference between having a house standing and having a house gone in these kinds of tornado situations. And the biggest thing is to find a way to protect against flying debris. The house on the left here was only destroyed because the previous house had collapsed and that house had impacted this house. What you see is a lot of impact damage to cause the walls of that house to collapse, the one that you see in the picture. And then on the right, 2x4s are very dangerous for these kinds of situations. They act like missiles. We surveyed a couple of houses where a 2x4 had gone through the first two walls in this house. It had gone through the children's room that was on the exterior, through a hallway, and then impacted an interior wall that led to the bathroom, but had not pierced it. So that's why when we tell people to get to an interior place in the house, we're trying to protect you from flying debris, because anything on the exterior has a higher chance of being impacted, especially in these high winds with the debris just flying around in the atmosphere. So to end on my talk, above all else, we want you to have plans and support infrastructure in place for any kind of severe weather event. Some impacts from severe weather are unavoidable, but you can do things to mitigate, especially the hazard mitigation plan that we have in process now, and support infrastructure are key ways to minimize impacts and mitigate the risks of these situations. And the sustainability of the community is always the most critical in these kinds of crisis situations. And having ways to rebuild will ensure that this community can endure through most natural hazards. If you don't have ways to rebuild, then you don't have a community when the disaster is over, and you can't rebuild from that. So having the sustainability for these communities is always key. So thank you so much. That is all I had in my presentation. I do see some questions in the chat, and I am happy to address those. Julie, am I going over on time? I don't want to take up too terribly much time if I'm overstepping.
No, you're good. Typically this ends right around now, but for those of you that need to hop off, you can, and you can view the rest of the questions on YouTube tomorrow. But if you have the time, stick around and we'll get some questions answered.
Awesome, wonderful. I'm going to start with Larry's question, which is the next one after Wallace's. What are the options for redundant communication systems? So that's an excellent question. So typically, when everybody's main form of communication is right here, right? Your cell phone. Most people have this attached to the hip. In addition to that, we are utilizing different. Let me just grab it here really quick. In addition to cell phones. As long as we have cell service, we have multiple ways of communicating to students through data and technology. We can send them text notifications, we can send them emails, that kind of thing, and they can get emergency alerts on their phone. Now, if the phone is not working, what do we do? WKU has an outdoor warning system that is voiced. So during tornado emergencies like this, it goes off and it audibly declares what the emergency is and the actions that you need to take. So that's another form of communication that is not tied to the cell phones. We also have our local, WKU has its own police department. And prior to the tornado impacting the city of Bowling Green, our police officers were roaming campus, ensuring everybody was either in their dorm or in a building and in a safe place. So we have the person-to-person communication as well. Now, for our emergency personnel, we have other ways of communicating beyond just the cell phones, although most of us are on what we call FirstNet, which is a priority network for first responders. So in the event that other cell services go down, FirstNet is supposed to stay up and operational. But in the event that fails, we also have radios and pagers that we can use to communicate with each other. And in the event that that fails, which in this particular event it did, because we lost power to our repeater, communication between emergency responders becomes a little bit more challenging. And that's something that we are wanting to discuss in our hazard mitigation plan is how can we improve on that? What are other methods of communication that we can develop in the event that our primary, our secondary, and then even the tertiary communications, what if all of those go down? What is our next step? And that's something that we are in the process of discussing. Great question. Nicole asks, do all major Kentucky universities have a team like yours, or is your program unique to WKU? As far as I know, there is not a program like White Squirrel Weather at any other Kentucky university to provide this kind of decision support service for their university from a meteorological and emergency management perspective. From my understanding, what we do is pretty unique in the sense that we work directly with university emergency management and decision makers, as well as support our city agencies, our local city agencies as well. Yes. All very good questions. Thank you so much.
John, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Going back to the slide where it showed the history of storms in December, and
yes,
there being such a steep increase this year, is that a reason? Is that climate or mood?
So without having, and I can pull that one up really quick. I have to scroll through my slides. Without having additional events to compare this to, because at the moment we really don't have anything to compare the December 11th event to. So without having additional events to compare it to, right now it's considered a mood. However, if we begin to see additional events similar to this one, then that could transition that from a mood to more of a personality. So we could see that go from, well, this was a fluke one-off event to this is now becoming part of our normal climate. Yeah.
And to kind of go along with that, I see that there is a steady rise as the years. Oh, the years are out of order. Okay. I was thinking.
Yeah, no, this is yes. So taking a look at the years of December for storm reports, they are out of order. This is just the highest number of storm reports down in that chart. Yes.
And speaking as for weather as a whole, does climate change impact these tragic weather events? I mean, does it play any type of large role in the increase of events that we've seen on a kind of world scale?
It's definitely possible. And again, when it comes to climate change and this kind of thing, it's all about taking a look back on, well, what happened and how is it changing? And yeah, I would say for sure we could definitely see an increase in magnitude of these events in terms of their severity. And if we see that kind of increase in magnitude, then at that point we can say, okay, maybe we're starting to, or have been seeing some evidence of increased climate change. Definitely.
I have, this is Larry. I have another question. There was a piece, I think, on PBS News the other night about the tree rings. And out west, they'd studied the rings of the trees, and they have come to the conclusion that this is the driest spell in 1,200 years out on the Southwest. Is there ever been a study of tree rings in this part of the country, or other areas of the country? It seems like a very interesting idea that you can get how thick the ring is indicates how dry it might or wet it was. And of course, we usually have a very wet season here, but maybe in the past there were drier times.
Yeah. I have heard about that study, and I do find that very interesting. And we do know that the thickness of the ring in particular indicates how much moisture the tree was able to take advantage of. To my knowledge, that kind of study hasn't been done in this part of the country, but I can, from a scientist's perspective, I can almost guarantee if that study has been conducted out further west from here, then that kind of study will gain purchase and begin to garner interest. And I'm almost certain somebody will begin doing that study in other parts of the country because of the findings of that initial study.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was wondering.
Yeah. And that's typically how it works in the scientific community. When one study is performed in a particular location and it finds interesting or unique results, that study will then be replicated not only in that location, but as well as other parts of the country. And
I know they've done that on glaciers in some areas, like up in Greenland, where they dig a core, take a core sample out of the glacier to see the various changes that might be made. All right, well, thank you. That's just very interesting. I kind of got on here late, but I found it very interesting presentation. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. It was a really good question. I like that. So Wallace has asked, does climate change contribute to the intensity of wind shear? Without having a study specifically performed to measure that, I can't say for certain. And that's kind of a hard thing to do a study on as well, without a way to directly measure that. However, what can be said is that it might not necessarily be a causation thing, but we could see an increase in the intensity of wind shear due to an increase of magnitude of other particular variables that might be more directly related to a changing climate. So it might not be that the what's the word I'm looking for? A cause and effect. It might not be direct cause and effect, but that kind of correlation probably would be able to be made in a future study.
I have read that the climate change has caused instability of the jet stream.
Mm-hmm.
And the jet stream coming further south, you're likely to get upper level winds going in a different direction from lower level winds, which, as I understand it, is the definition of wind shear, which is why it seems very reasonable to think that the wind shear is going to be more intense now.
And I can definitely see that being the case as well. With causing a decrease in stability of the jet stream, and we see a more intense winds at the surface level, I could definitely see an increase in wind shear throughout the atmosphere. Yeah. Jessica, thank you for your question, by the way. It's very good. Jessica asked that I mentioned that one of the factors measured for tornado was joules per kilogram. And it's not directly for a tornado. It's the factor I mentioned is called CAPE, and we call it convectively available potential energy. And it is the amount of energy that is present in the atmosphere for thunderstorms to be able to take advantage of and use. And the way that gets measured is through a very complex series of differential equations in modeling, and but we are able to measure it based on atmospheric temperature throughout a column of air. So when we talk about weather balloons, we send up a balloon with sensors on it, and that goes up into the atmosphere, and that measures atmospheric pressure, temperature, and dew point throughout the atmosphere within a column of air. And in that column of air, when we do that, we are able to take those variables, plug them into an equation, and that's what gives us the convectively available potential energy within that space. And then we use that to interpolate the amount of energy available around that as well. That's what models use in order to spit out that deterministic output of, okay, well, here's where we think the most amount of energy is going to be. I hope that answered your question. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions for John on this? All right, well, thanks everyone for hanging out a little bit over time. This was really, really interesting. And like I said, so different from the rest of our presentation. So John, thank you so much for your expertise and time and showing up and helping explain it. You did a really awesome job of putting it in a way that we could all kind of understand and digest easily. So thank you for being here. Again, this will be up on our Green Drinks page by tomorrow afternoon. Our next Green Drinks, we are now bi-monthly, is in April and will be in person at the Louisville Grows Seats and Start sales, but more information on that is on our Green Drinks page on the Louisville Sustainability Council.org website. All of those links are at the top of the chat box, so scroll up and click. And thanks everyone for being here. I hope you have the great rest of your week and weekend.
Thank you so much for having me, Julie. I really appreciate it. This was a great experience.
Yeah, thanks, John. All right, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye.